Let's start and bid everyone hello to this interesting talk. We are going to have a conversation with hopefully three former ministers, but at least the two former ministers present. Bertel Haarder, the Danish former minister, has been invited into a TV studio to discuss the Greenland situation, but he will join us as soon as he is able. But nevertheless, this is going to be really interesting to talk to two former ministers in Sweden and Finland that have been deeply involved in the educational systems of their respective countries. My name is Hjerrild. I'm a board member of Nordic Bildung, and together with Lene, Andersen, and some other people, we are working to revitalize, strengthen the discussion around Nordic Bildung and education for life, and this very unique Nordic tradition we have, not just to teach and educate in horizontal ways and transferable knowledge, but indeed also educating for life skills, for existential skills, for being part of society. And this is what really unites us, and this is what we're going to talk about this afternoon, leading up to a conference that we will have the 6th and 7th of March, where we will formally establish a network for Nordic Bildung. Just briefly on Nordic Bildung, that's a newly constructed word, and what we try to grasp with this word, which is, Nordic, English for Nordisk, and the German term Bildung, we try to grasp the meaning or the meanings lying in the Nordic tradition of dannelse in Danish, of bildning, folkbildning kanskje, of civistus in Suomi. So this diversity of a norm and value-based educational approach that we have in common in the Nordics, and to which persons like Grundtvig and Christian Kohl obviously have played a role, but so many other people obviously also. So this is what we try to grasp in this Nordic Bildung concept. And we find that outside the Nordics, people actually resonate with this. They understand, well, this is something truly Nordic. So we believe we have, an approach and a theme that is really relevant to a lot of people, not only for ourselves, but also throughout the world. So now I would like to introduce our speakers, the panel. Anna Ekström from Sweden. She's been a Minister for Education a couple of times, and she is right now the chairperson of RIO, that is part of the folk high school movement in Sweden, and a lot of other posts and positions that has to do with education. And Olli-Pekka Heinonen from Finland. He has also been a Minister of Education and Director General of the Finnish National Agency for Education, and holds a lot of other positions. Right now, he is the Director General of the International BI organization, so he's still very much active in education. And then hopefully Bertel Haarder will show up. Bertel, who is known to every Dane, he's the longest serving government minister of all times in Denmark, and mostly actually he has been acting as a Minister for Education. Anna Ekström, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting and important discussion, and at a very timely period in history too. And I see Bildung or Nordic Bildung as something that is a very, very Nordic history, but I don't see any reason why it should be kept Nordic. I see lots of reasons for Bildung for us to, perhaps a bit imperialistic, but still to spread it to more regions in the world than only the Nordic region. One of the aspects is that it's impossible to translate the word Bildung. I've tried very hard, and I know that you have tried too, and finished up with simply saying Bildung and creating our own interpretation of it. But in other countries, like in French or in English, it's impossible to find the perfect word for Bildung. You could say that the word Bildung when I hear bildning in Swedish, to me it might sound a bit old-fashioned. I see in front of me an elderly couple in the Swedish 1920s with lots of books in the bookshelf from the higher classes, and being able to recite long parts of the Odysseus or the Iliad by heart. Or I see a group of men from the labor movement after work, taking off their working clothes, going to build the people's house, the public library, the study organization locally, in order to achieve this Bildung that's something that, at least in the history, has been very much longed for in all groups in the Nordic countries. But on the other hand, it could be seen as one of the most modern expressions or modern aspects of the current world situation. The need for Bildung has perhaps never been as great as it is today. And I think it's very important to make sure that the word Bildung, the aspect of building, is kept flexible, and that we can make sure that it's up to date, that it's not too locked in old-fashioned way of thinking, and not locked in old-fashioned infrastructures or setups. One of the aspects of building is the fact that it's so extremely oriented towards what's needed locally, and that there is such a loose connection to different kinds of curricula. Now, both Olli-Pekka and I have been Director Generals of the National Agency for Education, so of course we love curricula. But still, I think it's wonderful that we have this part of the Nordic education system that are not governed by politically decided curricula, but governed by the local need among the people themselves, the individuals themselves, to learn in what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. It's a very important aspect of freedom in our Nordic societies. And also, it's, as I see it, the total antithesis of authoritarianism and populism, which is, of course, now more needed than ever before. It's also very important to remember that knowledge and Bildung could, of course, be seen as similar. They are like cousins, but they're not the same thing. And it's very important to remember that knowledge without Bildung could, of course, be a very good thing for society, but could also and very often be extremely dangerous and lead to developments that are not needed, not wanted, not in the public interest, not in the public good. But knowledge with Bildung is almost never a dangerous or subversive force. And in this very sinister and dangerous times, scary times that we're living in, when Bertel is obliged to stay away from this important seminar because of happenings that I would never thought I would even see, and a president-elect making claims on other countries or other populations' territories, not ruling out military force. And I feel that build a population which has Bildung, I'll say it in Swedish or in Nordic, en bildad befolkning är det viktigaste värnet mot auktoritära och populistiska krafter. A population with Bildung is the most important defense imaginable against authoritarian and populistic forces. So thank you for letting me take part in this not only important but also very timely seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your introduction here. That raises, of course, some questions, but we'll get back to those. I will leave the floor to you, Olli-Pekka, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for the invitation to discuss, and very happy to see Anna and Bertel hopefully later. and discuss these topics. I think the question of the similarities between the Nordic countries, it kind of becomes evident from the fact that we, as being in similar positions in Nordic countries, kind of, it means that we have had a lot of collaborations kind of together, and that shows the thing that the kind of closest reference group when thinking about educational or Bildung solutions is the other Nordic countries. And of course, that goes very, very deep into history. I've kind of often find myself thinking about that, what was the impact of, like, for example, Gustav Vasa and the decisions that he made to the values that then have kind of become dominant values in Nordic countries. And I think there are, to me, the main combining elements which there are is the connection between Bildung, community, and kind of citizenship and democracy. That they, how the way that they also kind of, how they bound together, and what kind of a view of education that brings with it. And I think that the very question of kind of those similarities, it's the question also that we ask, that what is the similarities between the societal values that the Nordic countries are having? Because I think then the Bildung system is a reflection of those values. And we had last year, the year just ended in Finland, was a theme year for sivistys. And in a similar way that Anna said that the word Bildung kind of rings a old-fashioned tone, it's the same thing in Finland with sivistys. And the aim of the year was really to get the dust off that term of sivistys. And that's also connected to the kind of years when that concept was first created. In Finland, the central person in creating that concept was Snellman. And Snellman said at his time that if somebody thinks that sivistys is something that stays always the same, they have entirely understood the concept wrong. So it's a task for each generation to kind of bring it to those needs that society is then having. And of course, being able of doing that, the kind of autonomy and the freedom of not having a national curriculum steering the context enables that to happen. So it's always kind of there is a mechanism that enables it to stay kind of modern all the time. And again, kind of coming back to the question that what are the elements of the kind of Nordic education or Bildung systems? I see that one element is to have a very holistic view, including the human development. So it's not just kind of educating some skills, but it is really that kind of a connection to society and to the individual development, which goes over and beyond the vocations. And then also I think that that is also something that can be seen in all levels of the education, also with the primary education and the national curriculums, because compared internationally, the Nordic curriculums are very holistic. They give that kind of a background, where in many places the curriculum is in a very early phase, you make choices which mean that you concentrate only a few things. And I definitely see that that is a huge kind of a strength. Maybe finally would like also to join Anna with the idea that we do need to polish off these terms of civistus and Bildung in our countries, because thinking about the volatile and uncertain, complex times that we're living, I think those are the times when you really have to go to the roots. What is the meaning of life and living a good life in our societies, that how that can be supported and enabled. And I think that then we come to the questions like the Bildung traditions, the adult education institutions in different forms, which again are not only vocation centered, but more about creating meaningful activities for also the adult generations. So very happy that we are here today having this discussion.
Thank you, Olli-Pekka. I have two questions. I think both of you actually touched upon two very important aspects. You said, Olli-Pekka, that Bildung also, depends on the values or builds on the values of society. But what are actually the linkage between these two? What are the role of Bildung in actually maintaining values of society? Is this a two-way connection, which I tend to believe it is? And if so, this is one thing. How can Bildung perhaps be part of, defending our values? This is one question, I think. And the other one, which is connected to this, because I'm so glad to hear that you are, polishing off the building begreppet, or civistus are, blowing away the dust, which is exactly what we also believe needs to happen. So, but what, and at the same time, as Nelman, you stated, you need to update and keep it vivid and flexible and, on time or relevant to the times. But what are the exact core then that this machine you were talking about, Olli-Pekka, that keeps Bildung popping up and kind of revitalize itself? What is the actual core of the Nordic Bildung? Has it to do with freedom, and in what way then? These are the two questions I would like you to elaborate a little bit on before I let other comments and questions in, perhaps. Anna, would you like to start?
Well, if you want to, I can at least make a try. I was actually thinking that when I and Olli-Pekka and I look at the Nordic education systems, we see that in the curricula in all the Nordic countries, you will find very important aspects of Bildung in the curricula. Words like taking responsibility, words like compassion, lots of words that could be connected to Bildung are also included, enshrined in the curricula. But there is one very important thing too, that the Nordic school systems are very much, our curricula are state curricula. It's part of the nation building, that we have the same curriculum all over Sweden or all over Finland. So it's very much state-driven. And also in Sweden, you've been smarter than us, Olli-Pekka. You never introduced the market-oriented school system in Finland, but unfortunately we did in Sweden. So very much it's a question of state and the market governing the education. But when we come to folkbildning or to the folk high schools and the study organizations, that's not driven by the state or by the market. It's driven by organizations that are coming from a free civil society. It could be, of course, the labor movement, but in Sweden, the free church movement and also in Norway, the free church movements are stronger actors when it comes to the Bildung sector. And I think that's a very important thing, that society is much more than only the state and the market. It's also the free parts, where people take responsibility themselves. So I think a very important way of modernizing and keeping the Bildung up to date in the Nordic societies is to keep the freedom from the state and the freedom from the market. I think that's maybe, at least in the Swedish context, to keep Bildung free from the state and free from the market is an absolute key. We must sort of keep it as popular movements, from left to right, from rich to poor, from religious to anti-religious, all parts of society, with the aim, as you said, to make sure that we achieve this personal growth that makes it possible for people, really possible for people to take a stand against authoritarian movements or paternalistic movements or indeed populist movements. I'll leave the floor to you, Olli-Pekka, now.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think one of the ways that you see the similarities is that Anna said so many things that I fully agree. And I think of course, one of the talking about the values of Bildung-based systems, the democratic values is something, and then there is that kind of also responsibility towards a community, which is part of it, and which probably has quite long historical roots where it comes from. And then, of course, like in Finland in 1870s, when much of the organizations were created, there was very strongly the idea that civistus belongs to everybody. That kind of an equality idea, that it doesn't separate people, but kind of builds on the shared humanity. I think that the point Anna made is very central about the civil society. And I think that is also a Nordic strength, that we have been capable of creating a good balance of the state and the civil society, which in a way, each one is in a way kind of, there are kind of checks and balances in that relationship. And as there was the book written about the narrow corridor between those two, that how to keep them in balance, I think that's really the question for our Nordic countries, that are we capable of doing that? And of course, it requires, how would I say, well-educated or very thoughtful policymakers, because they have to understand that it's also the benefit of the state that there are actors that are having that freedom and also have the financial possibilities to act in societies with those freedoms that go with it. Maybe the last thing, because the moments that we are living right now, because I do see that the Bildung idea, of course, is also, it has a connection with the Enlightenment kind of wave, which has been the dominant wave where we've been living, and we've been seeing in many countries a kind of a wave against it, going to different direction, questioning science, questioning kind of expertise and all that, and also kind of that threat that we can clearly see towards democracy. And it seems now that even that wave in some countries is becoming the dominant wave. And then there is the question that what is the role of Bildung in that kind of a situation? And I think it should dare to swim against the tide, not adapt what's happening there, but also dare to, at the same time as it must kind of be relevant in this moment, it must also be true and honest with the values it carries with it.
Yeah, and this last sentence is also, I think, a key question, because relevant to whom and who has actually the positions to define relevance in this. And you've both been talking about the curricula, that we in the Nordic curricula are building in elements of Bildung, which is true. In a pre-project that we're running right now, we have been investigating the purpose paragraphs of all the legislations of the school systems in the Nordics, and it's beautiful poetry about, the holistic approach to human being, human development, taking each person very seriously as a unique person, and all these things. But at the same time, I think a lot of people think that right now, it's becoming harder to fulfill this part of our curricula, this more open-ended part, because the pressure on, subjects of performance, of measuring up against PISA and all these aspects are making it increasingly hard actually to make these holistic perspectives really count in teaching. What are your views on this, the status of Bildung in actual school systems in the Nordics? Yes, please, Anna.
Yes, I would like to argue that the division between what's, for instance, what's needed in the labor market, the vocational part, and the Bildung part, I think it's a constructed and unnecessary contradiction between those two. I would argue that for adult education, those who go to adult education in order to find a vocation and to get a vocational education are as much in need and have as much joy of Bildung as all other people, or everyone else. And I would also argue that even if you are sort of searching to increase your level of Bildung, one of the ways to do that is to get a vocational education. So I would like to say that both aspects are needed. and we shouldn't make them each other's enemy or each other's competitor. In the daily life, of course, there is always a competition. There is a need to make priorities. And making these priorities, I think we should work very hard to find a way to prioritize both Bildung and the more vocational, the more immediately, in Swedish, nyttig. I think you say the same in Denmark. Things that are considered useful. So and when I was minister with a responsibility for adult education, we made a huge increase in the funding of vocational adult education. The reason was, of course, that young people don't go to vocational education as much as they did before. So in order to meet the demands from the labor market, we said that let's make adult education into vocational education. And always when I visited classes with adult participants and also teachers and headmasters in these adult vocational education organizations, I asked them if it was a problem that we focus so hard on the vocational side. And the answer was always the same thing. I want vocation, I want a job. That's what would, so this, I think it's very important to make sure that we explain even better that there is no contradiction.
If I may
I
add an angle here, because I do want us to continue down this track, but we actually have somebody here who is doing some very interesting stuff with Bildung and the Nordic tradition. He's in Ukraine. Serhii, would you be interested in perhaps giving us from your perspective, a view on, is there something Nordic about this? And also tell us what it is you're actually doing, because I think it's one of the coolest things going on our continent right now.
Good question, thank you. Thank you for this question, yeah. First of all, the first steps in Ukraine showed us that it's not correct to use the word Nordic for this phenomenon, because it's a humanity phenomenon. It's not only about Nordic countries. The first steps in Ukraine showed that all these phenomena, like folk high schools, like study circles, are pretty good work in our context, in our culture. That's why it's really, I think that the biggest part of our problem that we have now, not only in our country, the reason is absence of such kind of phenomenon in many countries around the world. That's why it's so important, not only for Ukraine, for all Europe, for all the world. You, Lene, showed the picture, the result of American president voters. The number of people who were for the Democratic Party and the another side. The democratic states are more educated than the conservative states. And this is a picture that shows one of the reasons why we have such problem. As for Ukraine, when you say about the specific holistic things of your educational system, when you speak about freedom, when you speak about responsibility and the connecting of freedom and responsibility, it's so hard to describe all this problem for Ukrainian educators that really we are on the history point that you had 150 years ago. That's why we need so many our power to put to describe our politics, our educators, all these things that I don't know. I think that we have many tasks, not only for one life, for 5 lives in this situation. That's why I don't know. I think that all that we do in Ukraine, we are studying your experience and sharing this information in Ukrainian educational sphere, political spheres, and many other spheres. Because really we understood that without building in Ukraine, we haven't not only victory, we haven't perspective for our country and for our society. This is my point of view.
And I would just, since Serhii is probably too modest to say what he's doing, I just want to add that he's starting a folk high school north of Kiev, and you found this old schoolhouse from the 1920s and renovated it, and you have prioritized the aesthetics and made it a very beautiful place, because we need beauty, and you have managed to do that during these completely horrible circumstances. But you also see the value of it, and so I thought everybody should know that.
Yes, indeed. Good to see you and hear you talk, Serhii. Definitely there are aspects of countries being in different phases of their national history, clearly. But I think that what we see among educationalists and people like you in Ukraine is a very strong conscience that you need to nation build from the bottom, from empowering people, from non-exclusive education, and it's so inspiring actually for us to witness that, because it also reminds us of where we came from. And this, I think, could raise another question that Lene and I have been discussing recently, the importance of nation building when we talk about dannelse, allmennbildning, civistus. Historically, these concepts have been closely connected, but what about today? What is nation building today in Sweden, in Finland, in Denmark, and obviously also in Ukraine? But I would actually like to hear you reflect on that. If we start with you, Olli, and then Anna, and then Lene, you can act as the Danish representative in absence of Bertel.
Yeah, I think I fully agree that the Ukraine situation and the discussion, I was just a couple of months ago took part in a two-day seminar with the secondary education reform in Ukraine, where the IB schools are acting as kind of brother or sister schools for the schools which are piloting the new secondary education curriculum and kind of reform of the schools, and kind of listening those discussions, it was so valuable to hear them, exactly for the reason, Kim, what you said, that it kind of brings back to the questions what we're quite often in our countries taking as kind of self-evidence, that we don't understand always that what is at stake. And in Finland, I would say that one of the reasons why Finland has been doing well in different educational comparisons is connected to the fact that civistus was connected to the nation building, and it happened at the same time when the first ideas about Finland ever being independent came up, when the civistus institutions started, and that also led kind of, it's connected to the many associating the föreningar in Finland, where there's a huge number of them, which is all about kind of agency, taking action for a purpose. And that's big part that again has enabled the nation to be built. But I think we have to be honest with the fact that in today's societies, we are too often taking these things as granted, that we don't understand the value of it because it's there. And once you don't see the value of it, you don't see the connection of how it builds the societies as kind of societies which are also stable. Because I think that's a big challenge in our times, that how to reach that. And I think again there's a very strong connection between Sivistysbildung, its value of equality, and the civil society, that all those together create the possibility of a stable society. So I think now, actually, when I'm thinking about, for example, the security and kind of defense discussions in Finland, there's now the awareness of understanding the mental security, that it's not only about kind of getting more people in the army or more guns or whatever, but it is also about the mentality and the resilience of the nation, that how they align when there are challenges. And of course, again, the Ukrainian example is something that shows us the way how to do it.
Thank you. Interesting reflections. Anna, to some of us, the Swedish case is perhaps the most challenged one when we talk about nation building, because different to the other Nordic countries, you have never been occupied. You've always been like this big brother country, dominating other countries, and perhaps leaving you without this, very strong and apparent need for building up your nation anew. Still, you talked about nation building as well, but do you Swedes have a specific approach and perhaps a specific challenge when it comes to, reinforcing the connection between nation identity and Bildung?
Well, what an interesting question. When I tell my children that when I was young, Swedes were seen as the big brothers in the Nordic, among the Nordic countries, they don't believe me, because they are very used to feeling like the little brother or little sister compared to the smart Finns, the rich Norwegians, and the strong Danish krona. So I strongly object to that big brother analogy. But the reason why I mentioned nation building is partly because the curricula have always been very important, as in Sweden as well as in other countries. But in fact, the building concept, the human building concept, Serhii, I'll move over to saying human building instead of Nordic building from today on. Sorry, Lene. But this idea...
Our business model is down the drain.
No, you see, one of the reasons that we have had been so happy with the building tradition in Sweden in the last 10 years is the big migration we have had. We have had not only in 2015 when we had more than 160,000 persons seeking asylum in Sweden in only 1 year, which was a very, very high figure. But the years before that, we also had a very big migration. And the Swedish adult education system and the Swedish system to make sure that you can get housing, etc., they all lagged behind and couldn't sort of cope with this massive challenge. But the Bildung organizations could. They mobilized from day one and started not courses in Swedish, but study circles and study courses, discussion clubs on what does it mean to live in Sweden? How do you date in Sweden? What is the concept of what are equal rights in Sweden, etc., etc. So this is one of, and I think without the building organizations, our migration or the problems we have related to migration would have been much, much bigger. And the benefits we have from migration would have been much smaller, of course. To conclude, I would like also to just point back to what Serhii said. And when you discuss the Ukrainian sort of start to build a society where Bildung is a vital part, to me it's very obvious that you do it. You use one of the really important lessons from the Nordic countries, and that is a lesson that you should never separate Bildung from vocational or for useful knowledge. What you do in your country, where you when your folk high school in close to Kiev in Wojciech, is that the right way to pronounce it? Thank you. Is that you use your resources for Bildung and for very practical training in paramedic and psychological care, which is of course something that's extremely useful, but also something that is done much, much better with a holistic view compared to a very sort of only practical view.
Thank you for that. Also very, I think, sound advice and praise for what you do in Ukraine, which is, yeah. Well, I'll leave the floor to you, Lene, for the Danish situation around nation building, which to some of us, I agree. I admit that to me, nationalism has really, it's kind of a two-sided sword, or it's some kind of a disputed concept. But please.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the word nationalism has a very negative connotation in a lot of places. And I think that when we use the word nationalism in the public discourse as something bad, a lot of people don't hear the nuances, but just hear, I'm not allowed to love my country, which is a very bad message to send to a lot of people who don't participate in whether it's study circles or evening classes or other kinds of education and perhaps Bildung discussions. So we are, I think we're creating a false conflict within our nations by using this word in a very unfortunate way. I would prefer us to actually start talking about national chauvinism whenever we talk about the nationalism that we don't want. And then try to sort of drive the concept of nationalism over to loving your country, and then having the toxic version of loving your country to be national chauvinism. When we look at the Danish case, I mean, it was deliberately the Bildung tradition with the folk high schools was deliberately to create a sense of Danish identity among the peasants and young people with the least education, because there was a clear and present danger of some Germans trying to take over the country. Turns out later, though, this is a historical detail that came out about 10 years ago, the Danish king actually tried to hand us over to Bismarck, but he didn't want the whole country. Kind of embarrassing, but it is true. But nevertheless, the transition from a feudal agricultural society to an industrialized modern democracy was extremely peaceful in all the Nordic countries except Finland, but that was because of an invasion from the outside. But the Finns themselves and the Swedes themselves and the Norwegians and the Danes and the people in Iceland and elsewhere had the Bildung and the cultural institutions and the education that allowed them to love their country. And even though a lot of new things happened and they perhaps didn't understand all of it, a sufficient proportion of the population could grasp new opportunities, could enter politics and formulate new ways of doing things that made sense to workers, peasants, farmers, the least educated. And one of the things that we've not done in Denmark, but which has been very popular in Sweden, also in Norway, I don't know about Finland, but that is the study circle, the self-organized. We can't afford to buy a book for all of us. We'll buy one book and then everybody will read the first chapter and then we'll meet and discuss it. And then we'll all read the second chapter in the same book and meet and discuss it. So you can actually do a lot with very little resources. And that has been a driver for popular Bildung, folkbildning in Sweden. Denmark mainly had the folk high schools in the beginning, and then we also created a format for the 14 to 18-year-olds, the so-called after schools, so after confirmation, so that instead of having this top-down authoritarian, and I think the Danish schools were actually less authoritarian than in other places, even from the beginning, but it was a different time. So the late 1800s, to have this kind of boarding school that was more focused on personal interest development, open-ended conversations, and studying in a different way than the top-down test-driven education. That has really characterized the after schools in Denmark. It's the method from the folk high schools, and this has then seeped into the rest of the educational system. And too bad Bertel Haarder isn't here yet. I hope he will arrive later. He was actually the Minister of Education when I went to school, so I do have a sort of a little bit of a say in the consequences of Bertel being the Minister of Education in Denmark. But I think the sort of very open-ended pedagogics of the 1970s, that was what Bertel tried to sort of standardize a little bit more when he became the Minister of Education in the 80s and conformed things more. It may have been a bit too loose. I don't know. I actually think that what we need today in the school system is much closer to what I experienced in the 70s than what came after. So we've actually, in some respects, stepped some few steps backwards instead of figuring out how can we learn better in a world with artificial intelligence and a lot of migration, people coming in with different backgrounds, because we need to rethink education in that context. Not throw out the baby with the bathwater and not teach everybody to read and write and have a scientific understanding of the parts of the world that needs to be understood scientifically, and have a shared background or frame of reference. But there's so much more, and we need to have that level of meaning making in education.
Yes.
So I think that would be my Danish perspective in the absence of Bertel Haarder.
Thank you. I think it was almost word to another what Bertel would have said.
I think he would totally agree.
Well, and elegantly, you actually told us how young you actually are, Lene, or how old Bertel is.
I don't want to get into that.
No. Now I will suggest we take a 7-minute break. So I will just share my screen again with a couple of questions. Before them, I would actually like to make a little advertisement here, or just show you this part of the mission statement that we are basing this Nordic network of Bildung on, that we're going to create the 6th and 7th of March this year. And as you can read, this initiative really comes out of an impression we have that the Nordic school systems, and indeed that goes for the Danish one as the one we know the best, increasingly find themselves under very strong pressure to both fulfill the needs and the requirements of the curriculum when we talk about transferable knowledge, but indeed also the human development, the personal development side of things. Not to say the training of critical independent thinking in our school systems, the time to reflect and to learn collectively. some of these qualities that we know historically has been linked to Nordic building tradition. And we think that this is increasingly a challenge, and we can see it in the lack of well-being among pupils and students. We can see it in the challenges of recruiting and retaining teachers, teaching staff in our schools. There's a lot of indications that our schools are not faring that well at the moment. And some of us think that Bildung, increased focus on Bildung, could be part of the answer. So this is what, in a few words, the Nordic Bildung Network is going to be about, raising this discussion and hopefully turning it into a Nordic movement of thoughts and discussion at least. So in what is now a discussion in plenum, I think it would be very interesting to dive a little further into this nation building today. We talked about nation building, national identity, national belonging, and I think we agree that this is still a very important component of building identity or Bildung, and creating this independent, critical thinking, open-ended education that we want, that is kind of at the core of our democratical values. But what are then nation building today? This is definitely discussed, and there's a competition within our countries. What is it to be a true Dane? But perhaps it's easier to discuss what is it to be a Nordic person? Question. And then, if you will, then also, open this question about changes to the school systems that at least some of us think are very important to discuss. So what could be the best changes to the Nordic elementary school systems and our educational systems generally in order to strengthen the life skills and so forth? So these two set of questions I propose that we discuss in the next half hour. Now I'll stop sharing my screen, hoping that you can kind of remember the 2 points. And then I would like to open the floor for reflections on this. Well, I could then try to pose a little more specific question than perhaps to, well, Vladan, please come forward.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for a very insightful discussion. Before I just make a question or a comment, I just want to ask, so right now we are focusing more on the Nordic identification, so to say.
Well, yes, but as a part of Bildung, as a part of this education for life philosophy. So actually also discussing, what role national identity or nation building could or should play in maintaining and updating the concept of Bildung. So I really want to keep it open, no conclusions as of yet.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I find this very interesting because I just want to share that because of my background from Bosnia, so the former Yugoslavia, when I was younger, I came to Sweden around 20 years ago as a teenager, and then I started, high school here. And one of the things that was interesting for me at that time was to compare Balkans with the Nordic region. I was very curious, like, why are these parts of Europe so different? Like, why did I came from one contrast of Europe to a completely another contrast of Europe? It was a shocking experience for me, and dramatic, so to say. And one of the things I've been analyzing, but maybe not writing so much about that, is that, for example, there are some similarities between the Nordics and the former Yugoslavia regarding both Bildung but also ideas about nationhood and country and governance. And to make a long story short, the Nordics have never been a common country, common nation, despite the Scandinavian idea, Scandinavianism movement during the 19th century, and some support as for Denmark during the war against Russia in the 19th century. And one of the reasons I would say that failed was because that idea was very elitistic. That idea was among intellectuals, politicians, journalists, and others, writers, but it was not among the people in general. While the Yugoslav idea in the 19th century started as a very elitist intellectual idea, but was able to spread to enough people so that some kind of Yugoslavia was able to exist before and after the Second World War. I'm not saying it was good, you know, for different reasons, but I'm just saying that was a result of the Yugoslav idea being entrenched among the people, and it was partially entrenched by the Bildungish organizations, as in Bosnia. That's actually what I'm writing about at the moment, also to kind of contribute to Lene's vision and development of the network. And I think that in order to kind of create a more, let's say, stronger Nordic identification, well, you need to do it through Bildung, but I would say today it would be even easier to do that through modern technology. You can explain to people how the meaning of Nordic and what does it mean to be Nordic has been changing for the last 200 years. You can even explain to people why Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland never became one country or one nation or something, or federation. And you can also explain to people, for example, why the Baltic Sea region is the only European Union macro region that has been created more bottom up and not by Brussels, so to say. So I think there are many wonderful examples from history that can be used to make sense in the modern day. And also to explain to people, for example, why the Nordic region is one of the most globalized, you know, parts of the world, compare even to other parts of Europe that are much less globalized.
Thank you, Vlad, and really interesting reflections and an insight into Yugoslav history also, that this pan-Slavic movement, as I kind of reckon was part of this nation building in creating Yugoslavia, is an analog or a parallel history. So the question of why we never became one region, I definitely think has several answers, but perhaps the conditions now are better than they have ever been before. So anyone else want to reflect on nation building of today? How do we come about doing that, and what about the Nordics? While you
I
think,
may add something to the Nordic Union. I mean, we did have the Kalmar Union, and we did have Queen Margaret I. We also had a monetary union until 1878 or something like that, where it started. It's like around 150 years ago. So we have had these very sort of integrating and then splitting up waves going on in the Nordics, and we had the passport union established even before the common market and the EU. So Anna, this is perhaps more your field, but we have experimented and given it up and returned to it.
Well, I think this is a very interesting discussion, but I would like to add that, as I said before, I will follow Serhii's example and talk about human Bildung, not Nordic Bildung from now on. But when we discuss the need for Nordic cooperation, I think we have a very strong case, and I think it is, of course, I don't think I will see it in my lifetime, but who knows? Stranger things have happened. And if the Nordic countries would have a federative structure where we had a common foreign policy and common, at least parts of common economic monetary policy, big obstacles have been taken away since Finland and Sweden have joined the NATO, since all countries now, compared to a few years ago, have very much more similar migration policy, for instance. But also, if we were to join together, we would have been the 13th biggest economic power in the world, and we would have been part of the G20 and things like that. But nevertheless, I'm not sure that I will live to see it. And also, thank you, Denmark, for taking away the 3 crowns from your state weapon. It's been a huge thing in the Swedish news media.
Interesting.
Talking about Queen Margaret. But when it comes to Bildung, or human Bildung, I think it is very important to listen to what Vladan said and keep this down perspective of building from downwards, not from upwards. And I think that is what made the Bildung movements in the Nordic countries strong in the early 20th century, was the fact that they were popular movements. They were not sort of decided from above or decided by the government or by the king that we should have them. It was decided by the people themselves. So I think it's very important to keep this bottom-up perspective. And I'm very fond of the idea of I wouldn't call it, the minute you say that you want to spread it to other countries, you sound very much like an elitist. It's like an elitist project. But if we manage to, instead of an elitist movement, try to sort of foster and encourage popular movements in other countries, like in Ukraine, for instance, now, and like maybe Vlada, you can tell me more about if things are happening in the parts, but in the former Yugoslavia. So that would be my contribution, to make sure that we keep it as a bottom-up approach, not top-down approach. And again, to talk more about the human part of building and less about the Nordic part of building. It is Nordic. It sort of started here, but and maybe it's good to call it Nordic Bildung. But when we try to discuss it in the international context, I like much more to have the word human Bildung.
Thank you, Anna. Lene, and then Mikkel.
I mean, the Nordic Bildung part is very much a marketing trick, because people around the globe look to the Nordics, and a lot of them think, what is it they're doing up there? I mean, it's like somebody has called it the achievable utopia. And you're absolutely right. It has to grow from the bottom. And I think, at least in Denmark, the really big blessing sort of behind the Nordic secret and behind this Nordic tradition is that we had elites that realized that it was not as if the people know too much, they will make a revolution. It was, if they don't know enough, they will make a revolution. So there has been in the very top of Danish society an awareness that we can't have dumb people across the country. They need to understand what's going on, and they need to be able to think and take responsibility based on an informed worldview. So we have not had a top-down corruption either that has killed off the self-organizing projects, which is what I fear would happen in a lot of places where there are elites who fear any kind of self-organization at the bottom, and who would just, I don't know, go out and shoot people if they gather too many illiterate people and teach them to read. So we've had a support from the top for the bottom, and we've had governments that were willing to subsidize it, but definitely stay out of the decisions. And that balance is unique. And to pay for other people's freedom, that's huge. And we've had people who were willing to do that. So yes, I totally think we should export this, but we should export the idea and the knowledge about that this is a possibility, and then people should use their own culture and their own tradition and grow the content from the bottom where they are, and we should stay out of that. But people, I mean, we imported the cooperative concept from the UK, and Danes think it's a Danish invention, and they kind of get, you know, a little sort of hurt when you say, no, somebody in England came up with it. It's not our invention. But it made a huge difference here. So ideas can travel, and I think they should.
Yes, indeed, ideas can travel. And I think that, yeah, Jesper, but Mikkel, you gave up your hand, yeah. So,
hi guys, I'm sorry I don't have my picture on. I'm not sure I can formulate this in any good or clever way, but I just found a kind of a contradiction in terms when we discuss building in terms of human building. Because when we are discussing building, it's in the word that we build something, and then when you build something, you need a strong foundation to build upon. This is what I, as a person from the Danish Højskole movement, believe in, that you build upon something shared, a shared history, which is when we discuss identity building. I think you can talk about a common Nordic identity when we go back to, like, say, Norse religious tradition and so on. So there's something shared here that we can build upon. When we discuss human building, which I think is a lovely word, a lovely term, but I think it has a contradiction in terms within it. Anna, I think you touched upon it earlier on, but what foundation do we build upon? What shared history do we build upon if we want human building? That's, I think, my question here, because the ideas and the ethics are right, but there's a task for the future to state what is the common humanity in this. I would like to hear your thoughts more than like to hear myself guessing.
Thank you so much, Mikkel. Super interesting question you're raising. Jesper?
Maybe it's better to discuss the question raised by Mikkel before I come with my comments.
Let's try that. If anyone has reflections on, actually, I have a reflection, Mikkel, and then Anna, perhaps you can add in later. But I think the reason why I think Nordic Bildung is actually quite a nice term is exactly, I think, what you're pointing at, Mikkel, that in history, in language, in the mother tongue, in the practices connected to a specific geography, is so much meaningfulness and meaning, added, that it's impossible just to build humans from abstract ideas alone. And I say this as a person that really regard myself as a cosmopolitan, and I love Ekström. I love the more abstract and lofty ideas get, the better I feel. But I'm afraid that's not the way the world works. And practice shows that Bildung needs something to build on, as you say, Mikkel, and that is history, it's places, it's the language, and the language holding a lot of wisdom. So that would be my kind of adding to your point here. So, Olli-Pekka.
Microphone.
Yeah. I also would like to kind of continue that discussion, and I see that in a similar way that I see that the kind of exporting of this kind of ideas is a bit difficult because it's always kind of connected to the history, to the roots, to the languages, to the values where it was born for a purpose. And it kind of it requires that connection in order to be valuable. So I think that something similar can be created all over the world, and we are talking at the end kind of the kind of human Bildung, definitely that can be used, but kind of one model of it is a difficult one to be exported. Something that I think that what could be a uniting element in this kind of a world where we are living today is that I think there in the Nordic Bildung concept, there is deeply embedded the idea of creating connections to self, to others, to the community, and to the nature. And those are elements that are central when we're talking about what creates a meaningful life. And I think those are also quite a lot of things that I think there's a fear that many people have lost those connections. That in our societies, with everything, all the busy life that we are doing, we are kind of losing those connections which really make us humans. And for that reason, I think the Nordic countries could have something valuable to share to the rest of the world with that that emphasis. And I think we always, as kind of Nordic countries also, we have to, of course, learn from the rest of the world and adapt what's happening in the world. But we must also look at that. What are our strengths? What to build the future? What is the basic that we are building it on here? Because we cannot export everything from somewhere else. But we have to be kind of conscious of what makes us special.
Yeah, you're special, as they say in English or American English when they want to say someone is gorgeous or likable or whatever. You're special. Lene, you're also special. The word is yours.
Thank you. I would say that what unites us as humans is that there are some things in life, there are some experiences that are universal, but we have to experience them in our particular way for them to be genuine. I don't have any children. I don't know what it's like to be a parent, but anybody who has a child shares that with all the other parents. And you love your children more than other children, and you have a bond among you as parents because you know what it's like to have that sense of vulnerability and responsibility. And you of course love your child more than any of the other children, and you probably also think it's the prettiest child of them all. The rest of us will not comment on that, but that's what it's like to be a parent. When my mother died when I was 24, I was suddenly accepted in this weird kind of community of adults who had lost parents. It was a community that kind of opened itself once other adults realized that here's another one who's lost a parent and who's had that experience. And it was not something that we said explicitly, except I had a much older friend who lost his father, and we talked about it. He said, it's almost like this secret brotherhood that I'm suddenly entered into, because there is something universally human about losing parents or having children. And in the same way, there's something universal about being a people and having a culture and a language that allows us to connect in the spirit, so to speak. So that the Danish experience of being a country that feared the German invasion and therefore built folk high schools resonated completely with the Norwegians, who were fed up with the Danes and under Swedish rule and wanted to get rid of both of us, and with the Finns, who were under Russian rule and wanted Finnish independence. Which brings us to Sweden, which is kind of weird, because as Kim said, for those 200 years where we have developed modern democracies and the sense of peoplehood and nation state, there has never been a real threat against the existence of Sweden. So where Danes, Finns, and Norwegians have had this collective sense of we could lose our independence, Swedes are like, oh, what a nice and friendly world we're in. We're just humans. We can save the world, and why aren't they as open-minded as we are? Because we know how peaceful the world is. It's just because they have such friendly neighbors. So there is something there's something universally human, but we experience it in our particular way. And I do not, unless I really make an effort, understand a single word of Finnish. Yet the first Finnish folk high schools, I think out of the 13 first Finnish high schools, 12 of the people who started a folk high school had been to a folk high school in Denmark, and 11 of them, I think it was Asko Højskole, that it was the same school they'd been to. So there was something that resonated, and they brought that to Finland because it resonated there. And when I have seen Ukrainians fighting for independence from Russia, I totally identify with that. I do not speak a word Ukrainian. I do not know Ukrainian culture, but there's a human experience that I can totally identify with. So I think there is a universal human Bildung. And when I say Nordic Bildung, it's just because we've figured out a pedagogical method for dealing with it. So we shouldn't export Danish ham more than we already do.
Thank you, Lene. Jesper, now your turn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the two very interesting introductory speeches and also the comments and discussion here. I have two short comments to the introductory speeches, and then I will comment this Nordic Bildung. Regarding the basis in enlightenment for the Bildung concept, I think that is true, but there are several different idea bases of the Bildung concept. Also, the more romantic tradition, maybe connected to the national identities and also other idea traditions. And regarding the difference between education and or bildning and utbildning, I think it is possible to have Bildung-oriented educations from preschool up to university and also folkhögskolor, of course. And regarding this Nordic Bildung, I think you can argue for that there is something that is special, as you do in this organization. But on the other hand, the Bildung word, it is the German word for bildning, created already in the 13th century. Then it was something quite much different, but there are some idea traditions kept from that time. Then von Humboldt and the ideas coming up there are quite much still from von Humboldt. And then we have folkbildning, of course, that is special for the Nordic countries. But now I missed what I was going to say. I totally missed.
Yes, you talked about Humboldt and universal ideas, and then the Nordic kind of bottom-up approach.
Yeah. Thank you. What I was about to say was that Wolfgang Klafki in Germany, 30 years ago, he lived until 10 years ago, approximately. He talked much about Didaktik and Bildung, and how they are connected to education. And he also talked much about Allgemeinbildung. And why not Allgemeinbildung instead of Nordic Bildung? Because I think Allgemeinbildung is covering it, and then it's not connected especially to Nordic national development. Then it's more about a Bildung for all. So that's maybe a question to you, Lena or Kim.
Yeah, Lene, she knows how to answer that.
Yeah.
Okay, she needs to answer
totally.
that.
Allgemeinbildung, Allmänbildning, is exactly about the content. So it's about in the place where you are, what is it you need to know to be able to follow a normal conversation, to not get hurt in traffic, to be able to provide for yourself and stuff like that. Follow the news. So it's like a basic knowledge about what's going on. Bildung, Allmänbildning, Allgemeinbildung, the all-round knowledge is included in Bildung, but Bildung also has the emotional connection to it, and the cultural heritage and sense of place and of being part of the community, and the emotional and moral development that allows you to take responsibility for yourself and others. So you can actually have a lot of Allgemeinbildung and not care about other human beings at all. You can also care so much about be completely empathetic to everybody and hug them all, but know nothing about the society that you're in. So there are two different dimensions of Bildung, and one of the ways that I am now, if I need to come up with a very quick description of what Bildung is two different kinds of knowledge: the transferable kind, which would include the Allgemeinbildung, and the non-transferable kind of knowledge that is life experience. And so Bildung is how you relate to what you know and how you interact with other people. So Nordic Bildung, the way that we created the name before we actually had a definition for it. And as people started using the term Nordic Bildung to refer to Folkbildning, popular enlightenment adult education in the Nordics, I was like, I need to come up with a definition for Nordic Bildung now that people have started using the expression. So to me, Nordic Bildung is a pedagogical method for providing both the Allgemeinbildung, the transferable kind of knowledge, and promoting relationship to it. And you can't really promote life experience without going out and experiencing life, but you can promote the relationship to other people and to the knowledge that is around. And you can teach in a different way than just telling people what to think. You can open up the conversation and say what you actually think yourself. So that would be the Nordic Bildung part.
Thank you. Just a short comment. I think Wolfgang Klafki meant something much broader, something that is similar to what you are saying when you're saying Bildung, Lena. But I have just
I have
a month
a very
ago.
poor sound from you. Can you move the microphone?
Better now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just some months ago, I read one of your articles about Nordic Bildung, Lene, and I think it's really interesting. And I actually am referring to it in a chapter that I just submitted about Klafki and Bildung and beyond. What can be a modern Bildung or postmodern or eco-reflexive, I actually call it, Bildung concept. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesper. We look forward to see your paper, actually, because to be honest, I think at the core of of, then let me say, at least my understanding of dannelse, Nordic Bildung, Danish Bildung, is this openness, this, creation, suspending, the hierarchy and the curriculum and the attention to create the possibility of the pupil and the teacher learning something together, something totally never heard of, which this field of possibility is at the core of, creating independent human beings, of critical thinking, of actually making democracy work, other than just being procedures for decision making, but actually turning democracy into a life form where we all feel, as dignified and equal members of society. And this whole idea of being on equal terms, never, how much, never, independent on your station in life, your economy, financials, whatever. This is something at the core of this concept. And I fear that we are losing it, actually. And it wouldn't surprise me if Klafsky or other theoreticians come up with same ideas, actually, because it is quite basic in some sense. So the more that people that advocate for this really possibility of freedom in the classroom, I think the better. Yes, please. Serhii.
Thank you very much. First of all, sorry for my English. I have no joke that I have pretty good level of bad English. That's why sometimes it's rather hard to me to describe something. Sorry for this. First of all, 3 years ago, I did the DNA analysis. And when I saw the result of this analysis, I saw that only 7% of my DNA from Finno-Ugric territory, but and 70% from Balkan countries. But in any way, the values of Nordic Bildung is very important for me, and I hope that I understand it rather good, and rather good understand the importance of this phenomenon for the whole world, not only for Ukraine. This is the first one. The second one, I want to highlight another case from post-Yugoslavian countries or Yugoslavian republics. 3 years ago, I read the research of folk high school movement in Yugoslavian republics. If I mistake, Vladan will correct me. If you know, the best results in well-being now have Slovenia and Croatia. Both these countries in 50th years of 20th centuries went to the Denmark and researched your experience of folk high schools. And now in Slovenia and Croatia, they have one of the most big network of folk universities and folk high schools. I haven't result of official academic research of this connection, but as for me, it's absolutely connecting these two things. The third one, in the territory of Ukraine, 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, this is the western part of Ukraine that was the part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. We had such kind of movement they named Prosvita, enlightenment. This movement started in 1867. This is the same years when the folk building started in Sweden officially, and they have absolutely fantastic results. To the 1939, they have 300,000 official members of this movement on the western part of Ukraine, with 15 folk high schools, a lot of folk building, and many other things. That's why for me, it's the case about the universal phenomenon of Bildung, not only Nordic phenomenon of Bildung. The next story. During last half year, we created 3 offline seminars about pedagogy of folk high school, Nordic folk high schools. We created these seminars with the rector of multicultural folk high school from Göteborg, Irina Meister-Bergman. She invited her colleague, the teacher from the school, and in Vovchok, in Ukraine village, we created the first seminar about this pedagogy. We had 25 participants from different regions of Ukraine and different professions. All of them said that they had absolutely fantastic feeling of safety and critical thinking space that was created during these seminars. We did 3 such seminars in different regions of Ukraine, especially in Lviv region and in Rivne region. And we had the same results in all these groups. All the participants said, this is fantastic feeling of absolutely safety and free of pushing process of education. That's why, dear friends, no need to be afraid to export these ideas, and no need to be afraid to export this phenomenon. The Ukraine needed very, very much. The world needed very, very much. And we had a conversation with Johan Logan. He is a professor of Norwegian University, the line of folk high school, the preparing of teachers for folk high schools. And we thought that it will be a good idea to create the Scandinavian Pedagogic University in Ukraine, in Kyiv, because really we cannot change the modern system of preparing teachers in Ukraine that based on the post-Soviet culture. We must create a new institution of higher education for teachers in Ukraine. And from my point of view, the best way will be to create the Nordic University for preparing teachers, not only for folk high school and folk building, but for regular institution of education too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Serhii. Very, I think, moving words and encouraging words also. What an incredible experience you had with that Swedish folk high school teacher or pedagogue. And we will definitely try to get in touch with her also for our conference on 6th and 7th of March. Olli-Pekka, the floor is yours, and then I'm about to wrap up things.
I just wanted to kind of maybe give one perspective to the question of the human Bildung concept, because I've been part of a process for now 6 years where there's been 7 countries, jurisdictions, an OECD, and also the last 3 years, the International Baccalaureate, my own organization, who have looked at the challenges of education systems. And it started with the idea, with the kind of a name of high-performing systems for tomorrow. And when it started the first 3 years, it was kind of mostly countries that were doing well in PISA comparisons, for example. And the idea was to look at, are there some paradigm shifts in education that we should understand, that we would be doing well in 30 years' time? And the outcome of this process was that, because we looked at the question of what is the final aim of education? And the outcome was that we agreed that the aim of education should be human flourishing, also including the future generations and the planetary well-being. And the last 3 years, what we've been looking at is that if that's the final aim, what would look school? What's the learning environment? What's the teacher profession? What's the curriculum? What's the assessment system, and so on? And actually, with that kind of thought process, some of the ideas come very, very close actually to what we've been talking about Bildung today, from a different perspective. But I think that there is, at least on the kind of abstract level, there is a tendency also to go to that direction. Of course, we know that there are also tendencies that go exactly to the other direction, just things that you can measure and kind of things that are kind of very black and white and reductionist and all that. But also, I think it's valuable to see that there is a tendency to go exactly closer to what we've been talking about, Nordic or human Bildung.
Super interesting, Olli-Pekka, to listen to that. And I think for another meeting, we should develop these thoughts about, what human flourishing in the age of climate crisis and of ecosystems breakdown. We are heading towards upheavals in a dimension that we could not imagine just 20 years ago. So resilience and independence and, capacity to participate and involvement and all these qualities, I think, will be increasingly important. So what an interesting conversation we've had today on this subject that is so wide and abstract and so important. And I think one of the challenges we face is that even having discussions on the Bildung aspects, the vertical aspects of becoming a competent human being, it's so hard actually to discuss it. So a challenge is to have these situations and these conversations, put in place. And I hope that we all will, take it from here and organize as many talks, conversations, and meetings around this difficult but very important subject, because we know it's so important. And thank you for Serhii and Vladan and Yuri to remind us that this is still super relevant and that we can learn from your experiences to kind of again think over what are we actually coming from, where are we coming from, and how do we maintain and even strengthen the tradition that has built our societies in the Nordics. Lene and I sincerely hope that you will join the next webinar where we're going to discuss more in detail the differences between Danish and Swedish elementary school. This is a discussion I really look forward to. So if anyone wants a final word, if not, then I'll simply just wrap up things and say fantastic gratitude to you, Anna and Olli-Pekka, and the rest of you for participating. Is that it? People seem to be nodding. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Anna and
Thank you very much,
Olli-Pekka.
Kim.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.